Zilthera observed Earth from the vast expanse of space her ship, hovering just beyond the atmosphere of the third planet in the system. She had been ordered to study for the Empire. Her species had conquered the stars and seen hundreds of worlds, but this one intrigued her. The reports from her scouts had been contradictory. Some said humanity was a species of little consequence. Others spoke of their rapid advancement, their unpredictable nature, how they had once been divided into warring factions, and now united under a banner of technology and ambition. It was an enigma, the kind Zilthera's empire had long since learned to avoid, but curiosity gnawed at her. As it always did, she couldn't help but wonder what made them so different, what made them so dangerous. She settled into her command chair, the cool hum of the ship's engines vibrating through the hull as she activated the surveillance systems, directing them toward a small blue and green planet below. Zilthera's eyes narrowed as she scanned the data more closely. A human settlement had been identified, one of many scattered across the surface, and within it was a particular residence where the child she had been instructed to observe lived. Her mission was clear. She was to learn all she could about humanity's potential and report back to the Empire. But what was the point of studying mere children? Did they have something to offer? She knew of no species that could be judged by the behavior of their young, yet this task had been assigned to her, and so she would comply. The house where the child lived was modest, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, no different from the countless others scattered across the world. She had studied the structure for a moment and noted the presence of the child's family scattered around the house, each engaged in various mundane human activities. Zilthera activated her sensors, bringing her focus to the child, Alex, a young human whose curiosity had captured her attention. The child was seated at a small desk, eyes fixed on a glowing screen, as their hands worked a console, seemingly entranced by whatever was unfolding before them. Zilthera leaned forward, intrigued. What was it that held the child's attention with such intensity? The screen before Alex was showing the Starship simulation game, one of Earth's primitive entertainments. It seemed like little more than a digital toy, but as Zilthera watched more closely, she saw something remarkable unfolding before her. The child wasn't merely playing the game, they were thinking, maneuvering the virtual ship with an instinctive grace far beyond what should have been possible for someone so young and untrained in the ways of warfare. The child's movements were fluid, calculated, even though the game's design was rudimentary at best. Alex didn't hesitate, using every tool at their disposal to navigate the virtual battlefield. Zilthera watched for a long moment, the complexity of the actions unfolding on the screen baffling her even more. The child was not simply following the program. The ship swerved in ways the simulation had not anticipated, using obstacles in the environment that had been designed only for decorative purposes. The child was making decisions with such speed, such ingenuity, that Zilthera could not ignore the unsettling feeling creeping into her thoughts. Was it possible that this human child could teach her something about warfare and strategy, something no adult could offer, something different? As the simulation played on, Zilthera's mind raced, her initial skepticism giving way to something else, an inkling of doubt she had never felt before. Maybe humanity was not as insignificant as she had thought. Maybe this species could teach even an experienced commander like her something she had never known about survival. Zilthera's observation continued as the simulation unfolded before her eyes. She had seen countless virtual battles across hundreds of species, but nothing like this. The starship Alex piloted was outdated, its engines underpowered compared to the enemy fleet, yet the child commanded it with an uncanny precision that defied the limitations of the game. The first wave of enemies arrived, an armada of ships, much larger and more advanced than Alex's own. The battle was designed to be unwinnable, but the human child didn't falter. Instead, Alex did the unexpected. The ship danced through the incoming fire, a move that seemed random but had a purpose. The ship slipped between the enemy's fire like a fish through water, using the environment around it to shield from the worst of the incoming blasts. Zilthera leaned forward in her chair, staring at the screen in disbelief. Was this child merely lucky, or was there something more here? Alex navigated the virtual battlefield like a seasoned captain, their fingers tapping at the controls faster than Zilthera could follow. The ship seemed to anticipate the enemy's movements, dodging and weaving with an almost preternatural grace. The alien commander had never seen anything like it in any other species. This wasn't just about technology or speed, it was about intuition, something that was nearly impossible to quantify, something Silthera had underestimated in her initial assessment of humanity. The commander adjusted her sensors, trying to get a clearer picture of Alex's tactics. The ship weaved through fire like a living organism, responding to the rhythm of the battlefield. It was as though the child felt the game's environment. Rather than following pre-programmed commands, the virtual enemies seemed to respond to Alex's moves with increasing frustration, their attacks becoming more erratic, more desperate. Silthera's mind raced, analyzing the patterns. At first, she thought it was sheer luck, but the longer she observed, the more she realized that Alex wasn't just reacting. Alex was creating opportunities, taking risks that calculated to force the game's eye to make mistakes. A new wave of enemies entered the simulation, larger and more aggressive than the last. As they closed in, Alex adjusted the strategy. Instead of running or trying to outmaneuver them directly, the child took a different approach, cutting power to the engines and letting the ship drift into a nearby asteroid field. Silthera's eyes widened at the move. It was bold, reckless, even, but it worked. Alex used the asteroid's gravity to hide from the incoming fire, forcing the enemy to fly right past them. And in a matter of moments, the virtual enemies were left vulnerable. Alex took advantage of their confusion and struck with precision, disabling the enemy ships. One by one, the entire battle turned around in mere moments. It was as if the game had gone from being an insurmountable obstacle to a playground for Alex's creativity. Silthera was still processing what she had seen when Alex's ship emerged victorious against all odds. The final enemy ship exploded into a burst of pixels, and the game flashed its victory screen. But Silthera's focus remained fixed on the child, who was now smiling and cheering with what appeared to be family members. The noise of celebration filled the room, but Silthera didn't hear it. Her mind was buzzing with a new realization. Humans weren't just good at fighting with technology or weapons. They were good at finding ways to fight things that weren't even supposed to be fought. That was what made them dangerous. That was what made them different from every other species Silthera had encountered across the stars. She had come here expecting to observe a primitive species that might be useful in certain ways, but not to be taken seriously. Now she understood humanity wasn't just a species to be measured by its strength or technology. It was a species that could adapt, that could think outside the box. And when faced with impossible odds, they didn't give up. They found a way around them. Silthera watched in silent contemplation as Alex's victory in the simulation was met with cheers and laughter from the child's family. Their voices filled the room with joy, a sound Silthera found curious and unsettling in its warmth. The commander had witnessed countless species fight wars, where triumph meant dominance over others, where victory was a cold measure of power. But this was different. It was not the cold victory of war, but the passionate, almost carefree joy of outwitting a challenge. And Silthera found herself intrigued by this emotion, something so deeply human. As the simulation ended, Alex sat back in the chair, eyes still wide with excitement. Before they reached over to restart the game, the commander had seen enough of the child's remarkable instincts, but what intrigued her most was not the tactical brilliance displayed, but the why behind it. There was a fire in the child's eyes, a drive, not just to win, but to test the limits of the game, to push beyond what was designed by the programmers, to explore every nook and cranny of the simulated universe with a boundless curiosity, something that other species lacked. It wasn't about simply surviving, it was about discovery, and that instinct for innovation was what set humanity apart. Silthera couldn't help but feel a strange sense of admiration for Alex. Despite the child's innocence, there was an intelligence at work here, something that couldn't be replicated in any simulation or calculation. The child wasn't merely reacting to the game. They were, in a sense, creating new possibilities, as though the boundaries of the virtual world were not walls but challenges to be overcome. She had seen species who relied on brute force to conquer and others who relied on superior technology. But humanity's strength seemed to lie in its imagination, its ability to see beyond the present and adapt to the future. And it was this adaptability that made them more dangerous than Silthera had anticipated. As the game resumed, Alex's tactics grew even more unpredictable. Their choices grew bolder and more creative. They pushed the ship further and further into unknown territory, exploring parts of the virtual world that weren't intended to be used. Alex was willing to risk everything to uncover the secrets of the game, and Silthera couldn't help but feel a deep respect for the child's fearlessness. Alex wasn't just a player in the simulation. They were a pioneer, unafraid of failure, unafraid of the unknown. They were testing the very fabric of the game's design, not to break it, but to understand it better. Then came a moment that surprised Silthera even more as Alex faced yet another overwhelming wave of enemies. The child didn't hesitate this time. Instead of retreating or using the same evasive maneuvers, Alex took a bold step forward. They chose to fight. They chose to stand and meet the challenge head-on, a tactical decision that seemed almost reckless given the odds. But there was method to the madness. The ship surged forward, using its limited weaponry to disable key enemy ships in rapid succession, forcing the rest to scatter. The child's strategy was unorthodox, but it was effective. Alex's courage to fight, when all logic pointed to fleeing, reminded Silthera of something deeply familiar. It was the same resolve she had witnessed in her own soldiers, in the face of overwhelming odds. Silthera's thoughts began to race. She had been observing Alex for hours now, and with each passing moment she felt a shift in her perception. This was no longer just a child in front of a screen. This was something more. This was a future leader, a force that could shape not just the outcome of a simulation, but potentially the very future of their species, of the galaxy. Silthera had always prided herself on her own ability to think strategically, but here, before her, was a human child who had done what no other species could do. They had made the impossible possible, and Silthera realized with growing certainty that she could not underestimate humanity any longer. The game continued, but now Silthera's mind wasn't fully focused on the digital battles unfolding on the screen in front of her. She had already seen enough to know that Alex wasn't just playing a game. They were exhibiting something deeper, something more profound. As Alex's starship continued to soar through asteroid fields and outmaneuver hostile fleets, Silthera found herself not just observing a child's imagination at work, but a mind that understood the core principles of survival and strategy at an almost instinctual level. What struck her most was Alex's persistence. The child was faced with an enemy force that, by all accounts, should have wiped them out in minutes. Yet, as the virtual ships closed in, Alex didn't panic. There was no frantic tapping at the console or rash decisions. No, Alex took a breath, assessed the situation, and then did something that completely caught Silthera off guard. Alex chose to adapt, to fail strategically in order to succeed. The virtual ship Alex piloted was damaged, the shields down to less than a quarter of their power, the weapon systems barely functional. Any other player would have attempted to flee or even restarted the simulation out of frustration. But not Alex. Instead, the child made a decision that by all accounts was illogical. Alex shut down the remaining weapons and turned off the ship's engines entirely, drifting into the path of the incoming enemy fleet. It was a deliberate act, a calculated risk to lure the enemy closer. Silthera's eyes narrowed. Why would Alex do such a thing? It seemed suicidal. There was no way the child could survive such a move, unless the child had a plan. Silthera refocused her attention. The moment the enemy ships came within range, Alex activated a hidden ship feature, the EMP disruptor, a function the game had buried deep within its settings, one Silthera hadn't even noticed until now. The EMP disabled the enemy ship's targeting systems just long enough for Alex's ship to slip through the chaos and break free. It wasn't the victory that surprised her. It was the creativity that led to it. Alex had found a way to exploit the game's environment, not by brute force, but by understanding the rules and bending them to their will. Unbelievable, Silthera muttered to herself, involuntarily impressed. It wasn't a victory through sheer power or technological superiority. It was a victory born of cleverness, the kind of ingenuity that could tip the scales of any conflict, real or virtual. Alex's ability to read the situation, to pick the right moment, and to make a bold yet calculated move had turned the tide in a way Silthera hadn't expected. It was not just about winning. It was about transforming the very situation into something the child could control. Every decision made wasn't about outnumbering the enemy or overpowering them. It was about finding an opening and seizing it. In that moment, the commander realized the most powerful tool Alex had was not the ship or the technology. It was the mind behind the controls. Silthera's thoughts swirled. For centuries, she had witnessed species grow dependent on strength, technology, and sometimes even manipulation to survive. Humanity, she now understood, relied on something else entirely: an unpredictable and limitless creativity. Humans didn't just face challenges, they redefined them. They broke down problems and found new ways to solve them, often without even realizing the magnitude of their capabilities. This was no fluke. Alex wasn't a unique outlier. This was humanity's core, a species that not only survived adversity, but transformed it. Every human child, every individual carried the potential for this kind of thinking, and Silthera could not help but feel a growing sense of awe at what this meant for the future of the galaxy. As the simulation came to a close and Alex's virtual fleet emerged victorious, the child leaned back, grinning widely. It was a small moment of triumph, but Silthera understood that this moment, this simple victory, was the very thing that could shift the balance of power in the universe. The alien commander couldn't help but wonder, what could humanity accomplish if they were given the tools and resources to challenge entire civilizations? What could they achieve if their creativity, determination, and adaptability were unleashed on a galactic scale? The answers remained unclear, but one thing was certain: humanity was no longer a species to be underestimated. Silthera had seen many species, each with its own strengths and weaknesses, but none had ever left her so conflicted, so deeply contemplative. She had come to Earth expecting to witness a species of little consequence, something simple to assess, easy to catalog. Instead, she found herself watching a child with an extraordinary mind, and through that child, she saw the potential for something much larger, something that could alter the entire course of her mission, and perhaps the galaxy itself. As the next wave of enemies appeared in the simulation, Silthera remained focused on Alex. The child, still unaware of her presence, was once again facing an overwhelmingly powerful fleet. The enemy ships, sleek and technologically superior, surrounded Alex's fragile starship, intent on total annihilation. Yet, Silthera noticed something different in the way Alex approached the problem this time. The child wasn't simply reacting to the incoming threat. Alex was calculating, thinking in ways Silthera had not seen before. This time, however, Alex had no quick escape, no simple way to outmaneuver the enemy. The space surrounding the ship was empty, barren, with little to offer in terms of obstacles or cover. There were no asteroid fields, no nebula to hide within. The situation appeared hopeless. For a moment, Silthera wondered if Alex would finally give in to the inevitable and accept defeat, as any other being would have done. But the child did not. Alex did not retreat or attempt to flee. Instead, the ship moved forward into the center of the oncoming enemy fleet. A bold move, one that Silthera did not understand at first. What came next was something truly remarkable. Alex began to deploy a series of unconventional maneuvers, tactics that seemed utterly ridiculous at first. The child used the limited weapons on the ship to fire small bursts of energy at random, not aimed at any specific target, but simply to distract the enemy. The shots were weak, ineffective even. And yet, in doing so, Alex had successfully thrown the enemy into disarray. The enemy fleet, confident in its superiority, was now scrambling. They hesitated. They were confused. Silthera felt a surge of recognition. Alex wasn't trying to fight the enemy in a conventional way. The child wasn't simply battling the fleet head-on. Alex was using their misunderstanding of the situation against them. The child's unpredictability, the complete lack of a clear pattern, forced the enemy fleet to second-guess every move, unsure of what to expect next. It was a perfect example of the human way of thinking outside the box. Humanity didn't rely on brute force or the obvious path to victory. Instead, they found ways to use their enemies' assumptions, their certainties, to create opportunities that others would never consider. Silthera was beginning to see the pattern. The child wasn't merely surviving the situation. Alex was redefining the battle itself. Each decision seemed to be about breaking the norms of warfare, challenging what was expected, finding ways to exploit the inherent flaws in the enemy's strategies. Soon, the simulation began to shift. Alex's small, seemingly insignificant distractions became more precise, more intentional. The enemy's ships, distracted by false targets and erratic movements, became vulnerable. One by one, they fell, not because Alex was stronger, but because the child had broken their sense of control. The final blow was a brilliant stroke of ingenuity. Alex, now having lured a group of enemy ships into a position they couldn't escape, launched a series of calculated attacks on their weaker shields, gradually disabling each ship's ability to communicate and coordinate. The once powerful fleet was rendered ineffective, scattered and isolated, unable to fight back as Alex systematically dismantled them with a series of well-placed hits. In the end, Alex had not only defeated the overwhelming force, but had done so by bending the entire nature of the game to their will. Silthera sat back, completely awestruck. She had watched this child manipulate a situation that seemed impossible and turn it into a victory through sheer cunning and creativity. It wasn't strength or firepower that won the day. It was Alex's ability to innovate, to take risks and exploit weaknesses that others would never see. The commander had always known that the most dangerous warriors were those who didn't fight the way others expected. But now, she realized that humanity's strength wasn't just in fighting differently. It was in their very approach to conflict. They didn't simply face challenges. They reimagined them, and in doing so, they created paths to victory no one could predict. Silthera's thoughts were swirling as the child finally leaned back in the chair, the virtual enemies destroyed and the mission complete. For a moment, she couldn't help but reflect on the deeper implications of what she had witnessed. Humanity, it seemed, didn't just survive because of their technology or numbers. They survived because they could think in ways that no other species had ever thought before. In that instant, Silthera knew that she had misjudged humanity's true power. This child had proven it beyond a shadow of a doubt. The most dangerous thing about humanity was not its strength, but its mind. And that mind could reshape the future of the galaxy. Silthera remained suspended in the quiet, her senses still locked on the screen before her. The faint hum of her ship's engines in the background, a distant echo to the overwhelming realization she was processing. Alex's latest victory, defeating the overwhelming fleet through cunning, innovation, and a willingness to take risks, had shattered her previous assumptions about humanity. She had expected to see a species capable of brute force or overwhelming technological power. What she hadn't anticipated was the sheer ingenuity of the human mind, the ability to see and exploit vulnerabilities where none seemed to exist. As Alex powered down the simulation, the virtual starship now a flickering shadow on the screen, the child leaned back in their chair, sighing in contentment. Alex's family had gathered around, congratulating the child on their success, their voices warm and filled with pride. But Silthera wasn't paying attention to the celebration. Her mind was racing, her thoughts consumed by the potential of what humanity could become if given the right circumstances. For a moment, Silthera wondered if she had been too quick to judge. She had watched other species, far more advanced in terms of military might, fall into predictable patterns, conquer, destroy, expand, seldom deviating from their established methods. Humans, on the other hand, seemed to thrive on change. It wasn't enough for them to follow orders or accept limitations. They wanted to break them, to push against the very edges of what was possible, to bend reality in ways no one had ever anticipated. But the question remained, could humanity's creativity, their drive to innovate, translate to the battlefield on a larger scale? Could this child's approach to a simple video game somehow be replicated in real-world conflicts, where the stakes were higher and the consequences far more deadly? Silthera sat up straight, her fingers moving quickly across the controls of her command chair, pulling up more data on the planet's history, its conflicts, its moments of both triumph and tragedy. The more she examined humanity's past, the clearer it became. Humanity had a long history of finding solutions when there seemed to be none. They didn't just adapt to their circumstances. They transformed them. From the earliest days of their civilization to the present, humanity had repeatedly shown an ability to overcome insurmountable odds, whether in war or peace. This child, Alex, was a perfect example of this spirit. The tactical brilliance, the creativity, and the refusal to back down in the face of overwhelming odds were all hallmarks of a species capable of not just surviving, but thriving in a universe that often favored those with sheer power. Silthera had seen warriors with unmatched strength, but none had ever displayed the same level of resourcefulness. The willingness to take a risk, to bend the rules, to make the impossible possible. As the child's family continued to cheer in the background, Silthera couldn't help but marvel at the simplicity of it all. Alex wasn't relying on high-tech weapons or advanced strategies, just a game designed to entertain. And yet, the child had found ways to exploit every flaw, every vulnerability in the system, turning each challenge into a puzzle to be solved rather than an obstacle to be overcome. There was something so profoundly human in that approach, a refusal to accept defeat, a determination to create something new from the chaos around them. Silthera's eyes narrowed as she watched Alex, still unaware of the true scale of the commander's observation. What if humanity's potential wasn't just in their ability to outthink their enemies in games, but in real life? What if, given the proper tools and the right leadership, this species could reshape the very fabric of galactic power? The thought sent a ripple through Silthera's mind. She had arrived here expecting to assess humanity's potential as a threat, to determine their weaknesses and their readiness for a larger, more aggressive role in the galaxy. But now she was no longer sure of what she had come to find. Silthera watched Alex's family continue to celebrate, the child's joy uncontained. It wasn't just a game to them. It was a sign of something greater, the instinct to innovate, to challenge what was possible, and to win against the odds. The commander leaned back in her chair, deep in thought. She realized that what she had witnessed in Alex was not an isolated occurrence. It was a glimpse into the very core of humanity's identity. And now, Silthera understood the true depth of the challenge she faced. Humanity was not just a species to be watched from a distance. They were a species on the rise, a species whose creativity and adaptability could change the galaxy forever. Silthera had come to Earth to assess humanity's potential, but now she realized she was facing something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Humanity wasn't just a threat. They were a force of nature. Silthera leaned back in her chair, her mind racing with possibilities as the realization settled deep within her. She had come to Earth expecting to find a species to study, a species that would fit neatly into the complex hierarchy of the galaxy. What she had found, instead, was something far more unpredictable, a species that could not be so easily defined, something that could not simply be categorized as a weakling or an easy conquest. Humanity was a force, a species that was capable of redefining the nature of power itself. As the image of Alex and their family celebrating faded into the background, Silthera's thoughts shifted to her own mission. She had been sent to Earth to observe, to evaluate whether humanity could be controlled or if they would become a threat to her empire in the future. The reports she had received from her superiors had suggested the former. A species with potential, yes, but one that could be manipulated or easily subdued. Those reports, now, seemed laughable. Humanity's ability to innovate, to think and act in ways no one had anticipated, was far beyond what any of the galaxy's established powers had expected. Her task was now far more complicated than it had ever been. She could no longer think of humanity as a species to be analyzed from a distance, as an experiment. They were not the passive subject she had imagined. They were an active, ever-evolving force, constantly shifting and growing, learning new ways to adapt. Silthera had seen the way they played their games, creating strategies from chaos, testing the limits of what was possible, turning every challenge into an opportunity to grow. And the most unsettling part was how natural it all seemed to them. Silthera had witnessed species who had become complacent in their power, civilizations that believed their advanced technology, or sheer might, made them untouchable. These species fought wars and expanded their influence without ever questioning the tools they used. But humanity, even at the most basic level, was not complacent. They were constantly challenging themselves to innovate, to think outside the boundaries that other species had long accepted. This innate creativity was dangerous in a way that Silthera had never anticipated. She ran her hands over the console, bringing up more footage. This time, videos of human leaders in moments of crisis, moments where entire nations were on the brink of collapse. In each instance, humanity had responded with the same core principles: adaptability, innovation, and the willingness to fight against the odds. Whether it was in the face of war, plague, or political upheaval, humanity's response was not one of surrender but of transformation. They found ways to survive, to adapt, to rebuild, and ultimately, to prevail. Silthera could not help but admire the resilience of the species. They were a constant evolution, never stagnant, never satisfied with the status quo. The very core of humanity's survival instinct lay in their creativity, a quality that could not be predicted, controlled, or manipulated. There were no established rules for how humanity would respond to any given challenge. They could go from playing a game to revolutionizing the entire galactic balance in the blink of an eye. Her mission, she realized, was no longer just about assessing humanity's weaknesses. It was about understanding how they thought, how their minds worked when pushed to the limit. And the more Silthera thought about it, the more she realized that what she had witnessed in Alex was a microcosm of humanity as a whole. Alex had not simply won a game. They had rewritten the rules of engagement, creating opportunities in the most hostile environment imaginable. Could humanity apply that same creativity to the real world? Could they turn their innovations into something more than just the digital games they played? Silthera knew she had to find out. The child, Alex, was only a glimpse, a tiny reflection of a species with unimaginable potential. But what could they do if faced with the full force of a galactic empire? Could humanity change the course of the galaxy in the same way they had reshaped a simple simulation? What if they wanted to challenge the established order, to fight back against the ancient powers of the galaxy? Silthera's gaze softened. She wasn't sure anymore whether she feared humanity's potential or respected it. Maybe both. Her thoughts turned to her superiors. She had already sent several reports back, but they had all been based on the outdated view of humanity as a primitive species with potential. Her next message would be different. She would not send them a simple analysis. She would send them a warning. Humanity was no longer something to be underestimated. They were a force that could change the entire balance of power in the galaxy. The decision was clear now. Silthera had been sent to Earth to observe, but what she would be doing next was something far more complex. She had to decide whether to help humanity grow or to contain them. And deep inside, she knew one truth above all others. The galaxy would never be the same again. The hum of Silthera's command chair was the only sound in the room as she sat in deep thought, the swirling possibilities of humanity's future consuming her every thought. The reports she had written so far seemed almost trivial now, inadequate to capture the true essence of what she had witnessed on Earth. She had come to assess the potential of a species, and now she was grappling with the profound realization that humanity was not merely a species to be observed. It was a species that could reshape the very fabric of galactic order. She tapped a few commands into her console, bringing up the most recent communication from her superiors. Well, former superiors. Silthera had originally been tasked with a very specific objective: study humanity, measure their capabilities, and determine if they were fit to be integrated into the greater galactic fold, or whether they represented a threat that needed to be neutralized. At first, the directive had seemed straightforward, even trivial. But now, as her eyes scanned the old reports, she realized how little she understood about the true nature of her assignment. Humanity was far more than a curiosity. It was a game-changer. The reports spoke of human fragility, their relative lack of advanced technology compared to other species. They spoke of their propensity for conflict, of their early history marked by wars and divisions. But what the reports didn't account for was the human spirit, the way they could rise from the ashes of their own mistakes and forge something entirely new. And most importantly, the reports had completely underestimated their ability to innovate, to adapt to the impossible. Silthera's eyes hardened as she thought of the decision ahead. The more she watched Alex, the more she realized that humanity's strength wasn't just in their ability to survive, it was in their vision for the future. Humans didn't settle for the present. They were always pushing toward something greater. The sheer audacity of that drive was unparalleled, and it was a drive that, if left unchecked, could very well challenge the foundations of the galaxy itself. Could they be contained? Could they be controlled? Silthera wasn't sure anymore. She glanced back at the family celebrating. At Alex, the child whose simple gameplay had revealed the limitless potential of human creativity. The decision to fight when all logic pointed to retreat, the willingness to explore the edges of the simulation and manipulate the very rules of the game. This wasn't a mind meant for containment. It was a mind meant for expansion, for pushing boundaries. What could humanity accomplish if they had the resources, the freedom, and the guidance to explore the universe? The truth was, she could already see the answers in Alex's eyes, in the game that had been so much more than a digital distraction. Alex had been playing, yes, but in that playful, youthful chaos, they had demonstrated the very thing that made humanity so unpredictable: imagination. The ability to build, to destroy, and to rebuild again. What had once seemed like a primitive race struggling to survive was now an emerging force that could revolutionize the galaxy. Silthera reached for her communication console and initiated a secure line to her superiors. She needed to send a new report, one that reflected the reality of what she had seen. As the screen flickered to life, the faces of her superiors appeared, rigid, stern, and focused on the business at hand. They had no idea what had transpired on Earth, no idea what kind of awakening Silthera had experienced. "I am requesting a reassignment," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "I have underestimated humanity. They are not the weak, controllable species we once thought. They are unpredictable, but not in a way we can dominate. They will shape their own destiny, and possibly ours. I recommend we adjust our approach accordingly." There was a long silence. Then the lead officer spoke. "You believe humanity could change the balance of power?" "I know it," Silthera replied, her voice unwavering. "And they will not be easily controlled. We must decide if we stand in their way or embrace the potential of what they can become." Her words hung in the air, a challenge to the Empire's status quo, a challenge to her own understanding of power. She had always believed in the superiority of her people, the efficiency of her methods. But now she sought a new path, one that was fraught with uncertainty, but also with a kind of exhilarating possibility. As she disconnected the communication line, Silthera turned her gaze once more to Alex. The child had no idea what had just happened, no idea that their simple game had shifted the trajectory of their entire species' future. But for the first time since her arrival, Silthera wasn't sure if humanity needed to be observed or feared. They were something far more complex. They were a force that would change everything. And Silthera, for the first time, wasn't sure if she was ready for it. But deep inside, she knew one thing. Whatever came next, humanity would be at the center of it all. and the galaxy would never be the same.